young mathematicians. My name is Alyssa Howell. I'm the Secondary Mathematics Director for Houston ISD, and I want to welcome you today. This is going to be Lesson 2 about integers. We're focusing mainly on 6th grade, but I know there's a lot of juniors and seniors out there who are still struggling with this idea. So this lesson could be for anyone, but it is a continuation of an earlier lesson where we learned to add and subtract integers. Integers are special numbers. We're just going to look at them because once we learn how to interact with integers, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, then we can apply those properties to any type of number. It just gives us a simpler set to work with. Now remember that integers involve both positive numbers, numbers that are greater than 0, as well as the numbers that are less than 0. So we've got positive and negative numbers. So a quick review from our last lesson. I'm going to be using some color counters. And if you remember in our last session, I asked you to notice and wonder about the counters that I have here. So what do you notice and what do you wonder? So like we brought up in the last session, you might notice that there are 2 colors. Some of the counters are yellow, some of the counters are red. I have fancy counters, remember mine are fancy because I can flip them over and make them the other color. But you may not have those at home. People don't walk around with these things in their pockets. So if you need to, you might want to make some on your own. So like this morning, I made some out of pieces of paper. And notice how I put positive signs on some and negative signs on the other. So you don't have to have fancy color counters. You can make your own set to use for our lesson today. So today, what I want to talk about is multiplication and division with integers. So let's back up just a little bit, kind of like I did in lesson 1. And I want to start with what you know from elementary school. So I'm going to ask you to get your color counters, and I want us to model 4 times 3. Now keep in mind that one of the ways that we can talk about 4 times 3 is to talk about 4 groups of 3. So when I model this with my color counter, notice that they're both positive. I'm going to have a group of 3. That's one group of 3. But the problem is telling me to have 4 groups of 3. So here's another group of 3. Here's a third group of 3. And finally, my 4th group of 3. So 4 groups of 3, or 4 times 3, is 12. And in this particular situation, I have a positive 4 times a positive 3. So you'll notice that all of my colors are positive. This is going to be important because remember, this is what you learned in elementary. But now we're in secondary mathematics. It's going to get more complicated. Primarily because I'm going to make it more complicated, but it's also more fun. So let's look at something very quickly. I want to remind you of something. We said that this was a positive value and that this was representing a negative value. So notice this is positive, this is negative. And the other way that we talked about the negative is that it's the opposite. It's the opposite of something because that's very important as we model this next set. This next set asks me to model 4 groups of negative 3. 4 groups of negative 3. Wait a minute, I think I can do the same thing I did just a minute ago. I can make a group of negative 3. That's what I've got a group of, negative 3. And the problem is telling me to have 4 of those groups. So here we go. Now I've got 2 groups. I've got 3 groups of negative 3, and I hope you're modeling this with me at home. So now I have 4 groups of negative 3. 4 times negative 3, if you notice, and I count them all, I have 12. But they're on the red side, so that's negative 12. So 4 groups of negative 3, or 4 times negative 3, yields negative 12. All right, so see, that was already a little more difficult than what we've been doing. Now I'm going to make it a little bit harder. I want negative 4 groups of 3. Now what? That didn't even make sense. Negative 4 groups of 3. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, well, I know I can do this part. You ready? Watch. I can build a group of 3. Woohoo! I can do that. I can do that. It's this other part in the front that's hard. This part is hard. So I want you to think about it in 2 ways, okay? First of all, do you remember just a few minutes ago, we were able to do 4 groups of 3, or 4 times 3. Do you notice the difference between our original problem a few moments ago and this time? What is different? What do you notice? What does that make you wonder? I'll tell you what I notice. I notice this one has a negative sign and this one doesn't. And I wonder what the heck this negative sign does to the problem. Well, remember that the negative sign represents an opposite. So this problem is telling me I want to do the opposite of 4 groups of 3. Okay, I think I can do this now. Okay, I've got a group of 3. I need to do 4 groups of 3. I can do this. I can do this. Are you doing this with me? All right, so I right now have 4 groups of 3. That's what I have right here. Right now I have 4 groups of 3. How much is that, by the way? 4 groups of 3? That's right, it's 12. But now I have to take the opposite. It's telling me to find the opposite. So the opposite of 12, guess what happens? These all become opposite numbers. Because the opposite of positive 12 is negative 12. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. So negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. So you know I'm not going to let you just leave it there, right? You know I got to make it more difficult. It's always learning. Always learning. All right. So here we go. I've got opposite signs all over the place now. I've got a negative 4 times a negative 3. So this is telling me, remember, this is saying I want negative 4 groups of negative 3. Okay, so I always start, let me think about this. I always start with what I can do first and easiest. So I can make a group of negative 3. So you join me. Let's make a group of negative 3. I can do that. That's pretty easy. Woohoo! All right, it's this other part that's hard. Okay, negative 3. Oh, remember what we said just a few moments ago. We're going to save this for the end because it means opposite. Now, can you create 4 groups of negative 3? Just 4 groups of negative 3. It's kind of like we're pretending this negative sign isn't there yet. So 4 groups of negative 3. I'm going to race you. Let's see who can do it fastest. The last time y'all were pretty fast. I'm trying to beat you. I got 3 groups. Let's see, let's see, let's see. All right, finally. I have 4 groups of negative 3. So right here is what I have right here. This is 4 groups of negative 3. But now what I need to do is I've got to take the opposite. And what do we do whenever we find the opposite? Are you ready? Okay, I've got, right now this is negative 12. I've got to take the opposite of negative 12. I can just flip these over. And now it really is a race. Now I really am racing you. The opposite of negative 12. I hope you know this in your head. You don't have to carry these things with you everywhere. The opposite of negative 12 is positive 12. So I have negative 4 times negative 3 is equal to 12. Now remember, I told y'all in the last lesson, and I'm telling y'all again, if you're not noticing and wondering, then you're not doing mathematics. So what we want to do is we want to use our newfound knowledge to help us create a pattern to figure out what's happening every time. Because, like I said, people do not walk around with these things in their pockets. They just know stuff. So we got to figure out those patterns and know stuff too. So you ready? We're going to do a couple of problems, and I want you to notice and wonder about the pattern that underlies what we're doing. So here we go. Hope you got your color counters ready. I've got 6 times negative 2. 6 times negative 2. And so what that means is 6 groups of negative 2. Now, before we start using our color counters, I saw you. You were already trying to do it. Hold on just a second. I want you to notice and wonder about the signs. If I'm looking at 6 times negative 2, or 6 groups of negative 2, what kind of signs do I have going on here? I have a positive sign, and I have a negative sign. Okay, so now let's use our color counters. Let's create 6 groups of negative 2. All right. Whoops. Making sure it's negative. I had trouble with the last lesson. I kept forgetting the difference between negative and positive. Whoops. All righty. Do you have 6 groups of negative 2? Because I do. 6 groups of negative 2. That gives me a total of negative 12. 6 times negative 2 gives me negative 12. Now think back to what you noticed. I had a positive number times a negative number, and I ended up with negative 12. Let's try the next one. And I want you to try to start easing into a pattern. What do you notice about these sets of numbers? If I've got negative 3 times 2. Negative 3 is a negative number, and 2 is a positive number. So I've got one negative number and I've got a positive number. Okay, that's kind of what I had last time. Except this time, it's telling me to create groups of 2, positive 2. And I want to do 3 groups of positive 2 and then take the opposite. Okay, I got this. 3 groups of 2, and then I want to take the opposite at the end. So 3 groups of 2. Now remember, this is my 3 groups of 2, and then I want to take the opposite. So the opposite is negative 12. Okay, I hope we're starting to see a pattern here. The last problem I had one positive number and a negative number. This time I had a negative number and a positive number. In those 2 situations, my answer came out to be negative 6. You know, I can't leave it there. I got to keep your brain stretching and moving, stretching and moving, stretching and moving. All right. See all these negative signs? Told you I'm evil. All right, negative 3 times negative 2. Oh, goodness. Hey, do you notice anything different about this problem compared to the other ones that we did? That's right. This one has 2 negative numbers. I have a negative and a negative. Oh, Lordy. Okay. All right, I'm gonna do this like I've done the other ones. Okay, it's telling me to have -2. I can do that. I can do my color counter of -2. It tells me I want 3 groups of -2, and then at the very end I want to take the opposite. So I have 3 groups of -2, and then the last step, I want to make them be the opposite. So -3 times -2 is equal to, +6. So this is different than what I was doing before. Remember, I had problems where I had one negative number and one positive number, and I ended up with a negative answer. This time, I had a positive number times a positive number. Nope, I had a negative number times a negative number, and it ended up positive. If I do a positive number times a positive number, like 6 times 2, that gives me 12. So if I multiply 2 positive numbers together, I get a positive answer. If I multiply 2 negative numbers together, I get a positive answer. And yet, wait, I forgot. What happens whenever I have a positive number and a negative number? I forgot. So try this one and see if you can tell me what happens when I have a positive number times a negative number, because I've already forgotten. Okay, this tells me I want 4 groups of -1. So when I multiply 4 times -1, I get -4. That's right, now I remember. When I have a positive number and a negative number, and I'm multiplying them, I get a negative number. So this is important. I want you to think for just a second, what are the general rules for multiplication? Because we've just noticed some really good rules. I want you to think about what happens when I have a positive number times a negative number. Or what happens if I have a negative number times a positive number, just like in our last example. What did we end up with? Our final answer was all red circles. It gives me a negative answer. So when the signs are different, I get a negative answer. Now the other case I want you to think about is what happens when I have a positive number times another positive number, or a negative number times another negative number. What does that give me? That gives me a positive answer. And so if the signs are the same and I'm multiplying, then my answer comes out positive. That's a really nice, neat little set of rules. I wonder, do these rules hold up for division? I don't know. Let's check to see. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? We're going to go back to elementary and we're going to review what division means. Let's see. 15 divided by 3. Oh, goodness. 15 divided by 3. How did we say that? Oh, I remember. This says I want to take 15 and create groups of 3. It's telling me to take that number 15 and to break it into groups, into 3 groups. So are you ready? All right, notice all my numbers are positive. I'm going to take my 15 and I'm going to divide it into 3 groups. Okay, now I know some of y'all are huffing and puffing because this is from elementary. I know, but we got to review this because this is what's going to help us understand it with integers. So I want to divide 15 into 3 groups. That's telling me how many groups to divide it into. So I've got 15, and here is one group. Here is my second group, and here is my third group down here. So I have divided my 15 into 3 groups. So how many are in each group? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that in all of them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, that's good. So there's 5 in each group. So 15 divided into 3 groups gives me 5 counters in each group. So remember division, we want to think about division as dividing it into groups. We can think of it how many groups it's telling me to divide into, or sometimes it's easier to think about it how many are in each group. So let's look at this next one, because here come the integers. So I've got negative 15 this time divided into 3 groups. So let's create our negative 15. You ready? We're going to see who's faster. Negative 15. I'm going fast. Going fast, going fast. Now I've got to divide the 15, it says, into 3 separate groups. 15 divided by 3, negative 15 divided by 3, tells me here's one group up here, here's another group down here, and here's another group. Now how many pieces are in each group? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Woo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ah, it's 5, but this time it's different because we were dividing negative 15. So this is a negative number divided by a positive number. Now remember our pattern a few minutes ago. If they're different signs, one's negative and one's positive. So I've got negative 15 divided by negative 3, and sure enough, I have negative 5. I have negative 5 members in each of the groups. So how do you think we're doing with this? We doing okay? Let's try another one. I like doing negative numbers, and I like being evil to you. So try this puppy. Negative 15 divided into groups of negative 3 groups. Ooh, this is a lot. How am I going to do this? I know. Let's start out by doing something that we know to do. I can make the negative 15. Can you make the negative 15? I can make the negative 15. That's something I can do. I can always start with something you can do. Woo. So I can try this. All right, I've got negative 15. Now, I need to divide it into negative 3 groups. So the other thing that I know to do is I can divide it into 3 groups. I was doing this earlier. I can do this. Negative 15 divided into 3. But the problem isn't asking me to divide by 3. It's asking me to divide by the opposite of 3. And so what do I do when I have an opposite of number? That's right. Flip, flip, flip. I take the opposite. Take the opposite. So negative 15 divided by negative 3 gives me groups of positive 5. Negative 15 divided by negative 3. So notice how we built on what we knew earlier. We took the negative 15, we divided it into 3 groups, and then we applied the opposite. All right? So let's think about that in terms for this next problem. I have 15 divided by negative 3. Okay. So I've got a positive number divided by a negative number. I'm hypothesizing. Hypothesizing what I think the answer should be. Are you thinking what the answer should be? All right, so let's try it. Positive 15 and it wants me to divide it into 3 groups. And then I have to apply the opposite. I have to apply that negative sign. So I have positive 15. I divide it into my 3 groups. And then the very last thing is I apply the opposite. And so positive 15 divided by negative 3 gives me negative 5 in each group. Was that what you were thinking? Was that what you were hypothesizing? So we are finding that our rules for multiplication also apply to division. That if we have the same sign, they're either both positive or they're both negative, that my answer is going to end up being positive. If I have one positive value and I have one negative value, then my answer is going to yield a negative number. So let's just try this out. I want you to see to make sure that you can do this. Please feel free to keep using your color counters if you want, but at some point we really want you to start being able to do this in your head. So for instance, if I were doing this in my head, I've got negative 12 divided by 4. What I might want to think is, negative 12. I want to divide negative 12 into 4 groups. That's what I'm thinking. Thinking about my signs, noticing I've got a negative number and a positive number, and I divide it into 4 groups. How much would be in each group? So let you try it. I'm going to stay silent for a few seconds, build my model, and let's see if you can get what I get. So I've got my negative 12. And I need to divide it into 4 groups. I see. I see one group right there. I see another group right there. I've got negative 12 divided into 4 groups, and guess how much is in each of the groups? Negative 3. So negative 3. Notice I have a negative number divided by a positive number, and it yielded a negative number. So negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. Let you try another one. Negative 20 divided by negative 5. Now remember, this is about as hard as I can give it. Negative 20 divided by negative 5. Okay. Let you think it through while I build my pattern. Build yours too. All right, so I've got my negative 20. Remember when we're using our color counters that my negative signs are all red, my negative numbers? And I've got to divide it, oh my goodness, I have to divide it into negative 5 groups. Okay, how about we do this? How about we divide it by 5 first, and then we apply the negative. So let's divide it into 5. Divide negative 20 into 5. I see it again. So here's one group. Here is my second group. Here is my third group, my fourth group, and my fifth group. Good. I divided it by 5, but now I want the opposite of 5. I need to divide it by negative 5. So that implies I apply my opposite. So I apply the opposite. Woohoo! Are you turning them as fast as I am? I'm super fast. All right, so negative 20 divided by negative 5 yielded groups that had 4 members in them. Notice that a negative number divided by a negative number is a positive number. All right? So let's try one more, and then we're done with this lesson. I want you to try 16 divided by -2. 16 divided by -2. And I want you to see if you can think the answer first before you build it with your model. So think to yourself, I have positive 16, and I need to divide it by -2. Ooh, I know. I can do 16, and I can divide it into two groups, and then I can apply my negative. So let's try that. Okay. Well, I'm already thinking I know what the answer is. Do you know what the answer is? So I'm building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I gotta have 16. Notice that they're positive. So positive 16. Positive 16. And I'm going to divide it into -2. So remember how we're doing this. We're going to divide this into a group of 2, and then we're going to apply the negative. So I divided it into 2 groups. That was easy, huh? So I divided it into 2 groups, and now let's apply the negative. So whenever I find this, I end up with 16 divided by -2 gives me how much in each group, ladies and gentlemen? It gives me a -8. And that's what I found. So I want to thank you for joining me today. This was lesson 2. Remember in lesson 1 that we worked on adding and subtracting integers? In this lesson, we worked on multiplying and dividing. This is a review lesson that's in the 6th cycle of our 6 weeks, and it reviews lessons that took place earlier in the year. Our initial instruction over integers and solving equations with integers took place in semester 1. But this is a nice review because this is a difficult topic for y'all to learn. Whew, it's hard sometimes, but we're working on it, and so I wanted to give y'all this chance again to review how to multiply and divide integers. Thank you very much.